Okay, so let's have a simplest example of callback, and then I promise we will start making an ice cream. First of all, with callbacks, and then with promises, and then with async await. But first of all, let's have a simple example of callback so that you actually understand what actually a callback is. So in simple words, when you call a function inside another function, that is a callback. In other words, we can just say that when you nest a function inside another function as an argument, that is called a callback. Now, what is the purpose of callback? So what callback do is that it forms connections between functions. Okay, so let's just first of all, it actually forms connection between two or more function. So let's just create two function. So the first function we'll just name as one, and we will just say that console.log. We will just say that step one, and let's just create another function, and we just need to change its name right here, and then we just simply name to change it to step 2. Okay, so now first of all, let me just call the first function, and let me just call the second function. Okay, so now let's just execute this code with typing node and then script.js, hit enter. Okay, so as I told you that JavaScript runs from the top to the bottom. So since I call this function one for the first time, first of all, that is why it executed the first function first time by just printing out this thing on the console screen, and then actually we call this function. So that is why it's just printing out this thing on the console screen. But if I just reverse the order, then what you will do is that you will first of all execute the second function, which is step 2, and then the first function, which is step 1. Okay, so now as I told you that callback is actually used to form connection between function. So in here we have these two functions, and now what we'll do is that we'll actually form a connection between them using callback. So right in here, this function will actually receive another function, and in here I will just name it as call underscore 2. Okay, so now in here, after this thing, we will just call basically this function that we have passed this function as an argument. Because let me just repeat the definition of callback. When you nest a function inside another function as an argument, that is actually a callback. So in here, we're actually passing a function to this function as an argument, which will be received right here in this. And now we just need to call this function, which is receiving this, which is actually receiving in here in this variable called 2. And since it is a function and we need to call it, so that is why we actually need these two brackets. Okay, so now what we will do is that let me just get rid of this thing. I will just simply call this function 1, and then what I will do is that to this function, since it is expecting some kind of argument, and what we will do is that we will actually pass this function, this whole function, as an argument to this function. And in this way, we'll form a connection between these two functions. So in here, this function, which we are passing to this function right here, will be received in this variable right in here. And then in here, this one is actually doing basically printing out this thing on the console screen. And then what we will do is that we can just add some addition by saying we can just put some addition by saying that step 1 is completed. Please call step number 2. Okay, so now in here we do not need to call this function, because this function we are actually calling this function right in here inside of this function. And now we can just say that we're actually calling a function inside another function, and that is actually a callback. Okay, so now let me just save it, and now let me just execute this thing, and now you can see that it is saying that step 1 is completed. Please call step number 2. So first of all, as I told you that JavaScript execute from the top to the bottom, so I just call this function 1. So first of all, it just encounter this line of code, so it actually prints out this thing right here, and then it actually called this function. So since this function is actually printing out this thing, So that is why I just print out this thing right here on my console. But if I just reverse swap these two lines of code, and then here I just paste it on this thing right here. Now what it will do is that it will first of all call this function, and this function is actually printing out this thing on the console screen, and then it's going to execute this line of code. Okay, so now just save your script and execute it once again. And now you can just see that it first of all prints out this thing, and then it is actually printing out this thing on my console screen. So that is actually a callback that is calling a function inside another function. That is the simplest example of callback.